Sacred Heart Hospital in Houston breathes with the rhythm of 1,000 small emergencies. Fluorescent lights hum their endless note, a sound like the world's largest refrigerator keeping everything cold and precise. Hannah Clarke moves through the corridors on the morning of her 8th year here, her white Dansko clogs making almost no sound on the linoleum, a ghost in scrubs among the living. She is 42. Her hair, pulled back into a regulation bun, shows threads of silver at the temples. Her eyes are the color of burnished steel, the kind of eyes that don't ask permission to look at something, they simply look, take inventory, and move on. On her left hand, beneath the latex glove, 3 pale scars run from her wrist to her knuckles like railway tracks to nowhere. Rain makes them ache. Today, rain drums against the 3rd-floor windows. Nobody at Sacred Heart knows that Hannah Clarke spent 12 years in service. Nobody knows that her hands once held the entrails of a dying soldier and willed him to live. Nobody knows that her teenage son, Marcus, thinks his mother has always been exactly what she appears to be, ordinary. Competent. Invisible. The truth lives in 3 places. 1. A shadow of shrapnel still lodged near the radius of her left wrist, too deep to safely remove, a fragment of Tikrit embedded in her bone like a permanent timestamp. 2. A collection of medals folded into a lockbox at the bottom of her garage, behind winter tires that never get used in Houston. 3. A faded unit patch, the insignia of SEAL Team 3 support unit, sewn into the jacket lining in her locker. The patch has not seen daylight in 18 years. Hannah pushes the medication cart into room for 12. The patient, Mr. Jerome Watts, a 67-year-old who had his gallbladder removed 2 days ago, watches her approach with the gratitude people usually reserve for angels. She says nothing. Her hands move with the kind of precision that comes from having performed this exact procedure 4,000 times before, changing the peripheral full line, checking the dressing, confirming the saline drip rate was exactly 125 milliliters per hour, not 120, not 130. Exactness is how you keep people alive. You're good at that, Mr. Watts says. Hannah does not look up. Just routine. No, he says. You're good at it like a musician is good at their instrument. Like your hands know something your mouth doesn't want to explain. She tapes the new line to his forearm with 3 precise strips of medical tape, each one at exactly 45 degrees to the vein. I'll page the doctor if you develop redness or swelling at the site. What Hannah will not tell him is that the tremor in her left hand, barely visible unless you are watching for it, is not age or Parkinson's. It is a fragment of a schoolhouse wall in Tikrit, Iraq, August 2004. It is the sound of automatic weapon fire echoing off concrete. It is the moment she dragged a young Navy captain, blood-soaked and screaming, toward the medevac helicopter while insurgent rounds punched into the sand beside them. 3 times she was hit. 3 times the body armor caught what the body could not. She exits the room. The corridor stretches north toward the nurse's station, and Hannah walks it the way soldiers walk into dangerous territory, aware of every exit, every shadow, every person who might be watching. This is not paranoia. This is training. This is muscle memory that refuses to retire. The nurse's station sits at the convergence of 4 hallways, a nerve center staffed by 8 nurses on the day shift. The coffee pot, perpetually half empty and tasting of rust and burnt hope, sits beside a stack of patient charts. Hannah pours a cup, black, no sugar, and opens the charting software on the communal computer terminal. The screen glows pale blue in the morning light. She begins her documentation with the same meticulous attention she applies to everything. Not because the hospital requires it. Not because her nursing school instructors demanded it. Because when you have held someone's failing heartbeat in the palm of your skill, you owe them precision. You owe them the truth, written down, preserved in ink and digital backup and the memory of your hands. Room for 12, post-op day 2. For line change at 0847. Site assessment, non-inflamed, non-infected, patent flow. Dressing dry and intact. Vital stable. O2 sat 96%. Pain level, 3 out of 10. Patient tolerating oral diet. She flags one discrepancy in Dr. Sterling's post-operative protocol notes. The documented saline infusion rate does not match the actual manufacturer specifications for the 4-pump model stored in the medication supply room. Sterling had written 140 milliliters per hour. The pump is calibrated for 125. She documents both figures and notes the discrepancy in the care coordination log with the neutral tone of someone reporting a fact, not an accusation. It is 0903 when she submits the chart. By 0910, the discrepancy has been flagged by the hospital's billing audit system. By 0911, a routine insurance check triggers a deeper review. By 0912, the hospital's quality assurance department pulls the past 6 months of Dr. Sterling's surgical supply orders for post-operative care. What they will eventually find is this: Dr. Sterling has been inflating saline infusion rates on patient charts. Slightly. Barely noticeably. 125 milliliters per hour becomes 140, sometimes 150. The extra charges, just $12 to $18 per patient, accumulate across 200 patients per year. Add those numbers, $2,400 to $3,600 per year. Then add the fact that Dr. Sterling's brother-in-law owns Midwest Medical Solutions, a third-tier supply contractor to Sacred Heart. The numbers compound. Over 5 years, they compound into a number that starts to look like fraud. Over 5 years, they compound into a number that looks like $87,000 in inflated charges, each one split down the middle with a contractor who remembers every favor. But Hannah does not know any of this as she documents the discrepancy. She simply knows that the numbers did not match, and when numbers do not match in a hospital, people die. So she documents the truth. Dr. Harrison Sterling notices the flag at 11:45 when he opens his email. He is in his office on the 4th floor, a space decorated with the kind of aggressive minimalism that says, "I have nothing to hide and I have nothing to prove." Mahogany desk. One piece of modern art. No family photographs. No children's drawings. No evidence of life outside the architecture of reputation. He opens the flag chart and reads Hannah's documentation with the same expression a man might have when he discovers a termite in his foundation. Not panic. Not yet. Just a cold, calculating awareness that a very small problem has the potential to become a very large one. He scrolls through her notes. 6 months back. 10 months back. A year back. The pattern is obvious to anyone trained to look for it. Hannah Clarke documents with a precision that should be impressive. Instead, it is dangerous. She does not miss rounding errors. She does not overlook protocol discrepancies. She flags them. She documents them. She preserves them for posterity and for auditors. Sterling's jaw tightens, just barely, just enough that his assistant, Diane, would notice if she were standing in the office. But Diane is not in the office. Sterling is alone with the knowledge that his income stream has just been connected to a very detailed trail of evidence. And that evidence has been documented by a nurse he has never once spoken to, a woman whose name appears on no surgical teams, no committees, no nursing boards. A woman who seems to exist solely to document what other people get wrong. He closes the email. He does not reply. He does not confront. Sterling has never been a man to reveal his hand when the game is still in progress. Instead, he opens a new browser tab and searches, Hannah Clarke, Sacred Heart Hospital, Houston, Texas. The search returns nothing useful. No LinkedIn profile. No social media accounts. No professional registry beyond her current RN license. It is as if Hannah Clarke simply materialized into existence the day Sacred Heart hired her, fully formed and without history. This strikes Sterling as interesting. This strikes him as suspicious. This strikes him as a problem that might require investigation. But that investigation will have to wait. Because at 11:50, Sterling's phone rings. It is the chief financial officer. It is regarding some discrepancies in billing codes. It is regarding questions from insurance. It is regarding a chart that flagged inconsistencies. And Sterling's voice, when he answers, is smooth as silk and twice as cold. "I'll look into it immediately," he says, and he is already making a mental note of the nurse who documented those inconsistencies. Hannah Clarke. The shadow. The ghost. The woman who moves through these halls like she is counting something only she can see. And he is thinking, with a kind of clarity that comes from facing a genuine threat, that invisible people can sometimes be made visible. And visible people can sometimes be made to disappear. What he does not know yet is that Hannah has been trained to see people like him coming. That the tremor in her left hand is not a weakness, it is a warning system, calibrated by 8 years of military trauma to sense danger the way animals sense earthquakes. That beneath the jacket with the sewn-in patch, beneath the ordinary scrubs and the regulation bun, she is still exactly what she always was. And she is watching him the way soldiers watch the horizon at dusk. Thursday morning in room 318, the Hendricks family gathered like a storm waiting to break. Mrs. Hendricks sat in the vinyl chair, her husband beside her, their daughter in the corner pretending to check her phone. The patient, their son, post-op day 3 from a bowel resection, lay in the bed with the careful stillness of someone learning to breathe without pain. Dr. Sterling entered the way he always did, like he owned the oxygen. Hannah was adjusting the flow, watching the line for any sign of infiltration. She'd been a nurse for 18 years. She knew what post-op sepsis looked like before the cultures came back. She knew what Sterling's orders from Tuesday looked like too, orders that contradicted the hospital's updated sepsis protocol from the same morning's conference. So when she'd charted her assessment, she'd documented both the standing orders and the protocol deviation. Just data. Just the truth written in ink. Sterling picked up the chart. His eyes moved across the page like a predator reading tracks. Then he turned to the family, his smile surgical and bright. "Nurse Clarke," he said, voice warm as a heating lamp, "can you explain to everyone why you second-guess my post-op orders? Or do protocols not apply to you?" The room contracted. Hannah's hand stilled on the tubing. One measured breath. Her heart rate climbed, not from fear but from recognition. This was how it started. This was the opening move. "I followed the sepsis protocol from Tuesday's conference, Dr. Sterling." Her voice stayed level. Deferential. The voice she'd learned to wear like a uniform. "That's the problem with nurses who think they're doctors," Sterling said, turning back to the family with that same fluorescent smile. "They forget their place." The silence that followed had weight. Mrs. Hendricks looked at her hands. The son's eyes found the ceiling. Sterling moved on to check the dressing, his fingers moving with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly how much damage he'd just done. Hannah finished the check. Documented the vitals. Left the room with her spine straight and her jaw tight enough to crack teeth. The hallway stretched ahead, fluorescent lights humming their mechanical song, and for just a moment, one moment where no one was watching, she pressed her palm against the wall and felt the tremor in her own wrist. Not fear. Something older. Something that had been sleeping for 20 years, and it was waking up. By lunch, the break room was its own cold geography. Hannah carried her sandwich to the corner table where she usually sat, where Yolanda and the 2 Janices had shared a table with her for 4 years. They were already seated. She pulled out the chair. The silence hit like a pressure change. Yolanda gathered her tray first. Then Janice 1. Then Janice 2. They didn't look at her. They just migrated across the room like schools of fish responding to a predator they couldn't see. A 4th-year nursing student at the next table leaned toward her friend. Hannah heard it clearly, under review. Hannah sat alone. Ate her sandwich. It tasted like copper. The thing about serving in a war zone is that you learn what fear looks like in other people's eyes before you feel it in your own chest. You watch men process mortality in real time. You see how quickly civilization becomes a thin veneer when the pressure mounts high enough. Hannah had seen a sergeant crack under fire in Tikrit, good man, strong man, and she'd learned that fear isn't weakness. Fear is information. Pain is information. Isolation is information too. Friday morning, the disciplinary board was posted in the hallway outside the break room. Standard cork, standard white index cards, standard hospital business. Hannah read it between patient rooms. Clarke, H, insubordination and failure to follow chain of command. The words were so perfectly, surgically placed. No specifics. No context. Just enough to trigger the hospital's policy review process. Just enough to make her termination inevitable if Sterling kept documenting. Just enough to make her unemployable somewhere else, because once a hospital flags you for insubordination, other hospitals ask questions. It was competent work. She had to give him that. The afternoon brought the hallway ambush. Sterling found her near the supply closet, that narrow corridor between ICU and the med-surg unit where no one goes unless they need something specific. She was reaching for sterile gauze when his voice found her from behind. "You're a liability, clipboard." His voice stayed low. Controlled. "I'm building a file, and when I'm done, you'll be lucky to work at a veterinary clinic." Clipboard. That was the nickname he'd started using in rounds. A nurse, but less. A thing, not a person. Hannah turned slowly. Sterling was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and chemical, and something else underneath. The smell of a man who'd never had to wonder if he'd survive the next 6 hours. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. He was enjoying this. One measured breath. She let the moment extend just long enough that Sterling's smile began to fade slightly. Then she spoke, and her voice came from somewhere deeper than the throat, somewhere that had stood in a schoolhouse in Tikrit while the world exploded, somewhere that had carried a 19-year-old captain through rubble and shrapnel while blood soaked through the front of her tactical vest. "I've stood before better men than you while they screamed, Dr. Sterling. I'm still here." The silence was the sound of a pressure seal breaking. Sterling's jaw tightened. His hand reached for his phone before his body had even decided to move, muscle memory of command, the need to document, to report, to escalate. He turned and walked away, already dialing. Hannah watched him go, her hand steady at her sides, her breathing even. There was no tremor. There was no heat in her cheeks. There was only the absolute certainty of a woman who had already survived the worst thing that could happen, and everything else was just logistics. The supply closet door clicked shut behind her. She grabbed the sterile gauze and went back to her patients. By Sunday afternoon, everything had shifted. Sterling had orchestrated a reassignment with the kind of surgical precision that came from years of working the institutional machinery. Hannah was moved to the surgical ICU, away from her regular unit, away from the nurses who knew her, away from the rhythm she'd built over 4 years of quiet competence. It was punitive without being explicitly punitive. It was brilliant. Her new assignment that Saturday was a Navy captain. Captain Marcus Webb, the chart said. Combat injuries, Middle East theater, admitted Friday night. Chest tubes, facial lacerations, 3 fractured ribs, and the kind of exhaustion that came from having seen things that rewired your nervous system. Hannah read the chart without emotion. Just clinical assessment. 38-year-old male, Navy pilot, post-op day 1, vital stable, pain management adequate. She'd cared for soldiers before. It was just a chart. Just a patient. Sunday afternoon, Webb regained consciousness. His eyes opened at 2:41 p.m. according to the monitor, and they locked onto her face with the kind of recognition that made the air in the room change pressure. "You?" His voice was barely there, fractured as his ribs. "You're the medic." Hannah's hands froze on his full line. She felt it then, the exact moment her body recognized something her mind had spent 20 years trying to forget. Tikrit. 2004. Webb's breathing quickened. His heart rate climbed on the monitor, small spikes in the rhythm. The schoolhouse. I was 19. Scared kid with a rifle. You pulled me out when the building was collapsing. You were shot, bleeding everywhere, but you wouldn't leave me. Hannah's hands trembled. Her face drained of color, and this was in public, where Sterling was watching from the nurse's station 60 feet away, and there was nothing she could do about it because the truth was waking up in this bed and she couldn't get it back into the dark. "Captain, I think you're confusing me with someone else," she said, but her voice cracked on the third word. Webb reached for her wrist. His grip was weak but absolute. "Senior Chief. I never forgot your face." Hannah gently removed his hand. The touch felt like a door opening that she'd welded shut 2 decades ago. "Rest, Captain. I'll check on you in an hour." She turned and walked out of the room, her heart hammering hard enough to hurt. The hallway stretched ahead, 40 feet of fluorescent light and squeaking linoleum and the faint smell of antiseptic. Hannah focused on her breathing. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out for 6 counts. The same technique she'd used in combat when her body wanted to betray her. But when she glanced back toward the nurse's station, she saw Dr. Sterling watching her. His expression was something that lived between confusion and calculation. He was putting pieces together. Not all of them, but enough. Hannah turned the corner toward the medication dispensary, her scrubs moving like water, her badge catching the overhead light. Behind her, she heard Sterling's chair scrape back from the desk. She heard his footsteps moving in the opposite direction. And she heard something else underneath the hospital's mechanical chorus, the sound of a clock beginning to tick. Monday morning arrived like every other morning at Sacred Heart, fluorescent lights flickering on their timers, coffee brewing in the break room, the ventilator on unit for wheezed its mechanical rhythm into the silence. Hannah had already changed into her scrubs by 6:02 a.m., before the day shift nurses arrived, before the hallways filled with the sound of her colleagues' voices. Invisibility was a skill she'd perfected over 18 years. It was easier that way. What she didn't know was that Dr. Sterling was already 3 phone calls ahead of her. The first call came at 7:15 a.m., before his office door was even unlocked. He sat in his Mercedes in the hospital parking lot, engine running, and dialed board member Richardson's number with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much leverage he possessed. Richardson answered on the second ring, always did when Sterling called. The man owed him for the Oakmorn Country Club membership recommendation, the one that had cost Sterling exactly 1 phone call to the right people and had cost Richardson 8 years of social climbing through the right doors. "I need you to support a termination decision," Sterling said, no preamble, no hello. "Liability issue. I'll brief you later. Tell the board she's a danger to protocol compliance." Richardson's response was predictable. "How serious?" "Serious enough that my recommendation carries weight. You just need to nod when it matters." The line went dead. Sterling didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. The second call went to HR Director Melissa Grant at 7:22 a.m. She was in her office already, always was, preparing files for the morning's employee reviews. Sterling knew her routine because he designed it that way. He also knew about her husband's surgical complications from 3 years ago, the one Sterling had conveniently overlooked during post-op review. A blood clot that should have been caught in recovery. A complication that could have ended Grant's husband's career as an orthopedic surgeon if someone with access to medical records had decided to file a report. Sterling had decided not to. "Pull Hannah Clarke's employment file," Sterling said. "Everything. Before 2006, after 2006, I need to see the gaps." Grant's voice trembled slightly. "What are we looking for?" "Inconsistencies. She's been here 18 years. That means she came somewhere else from. I want to know where." The line went dead again. Sterling didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. The third call was to Morrison Private Investigations at 7:34 a.m. Sterling had used Morrison before, 3 times, for background checks that should have been routine but weren't. Morrison specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. People with gaps in their employment history. People with something to hide. "I need a name," Sterling said. "Hannah Clarke. 41 years old. Works at Sacred Heart as a registered nurse." There's a 7-year gap before 2006. Find out who she was. Federal database. Morrison asked. Anything you can access. Quietly. Sterling ended the call and sat in his car, watching the morning shift nurses arrive through the windshield. He could see Hannah moving through the parking lot toward the employee entrance, her badge already in her hand, her shoulders already curved inward in that way that made her invisible. She didn't look dangerous. That was the problem. Dangerous people looked the part. This one looked like she was apologizing for existing. He didn't know he was standing next to a legend. By 9:56 a.m., Sterling had accomplished what he'd set out to do. The board member had received a text confirming support. The HR director had pulled files and was waiting for direction. The investigator had already sent 3 preliminary reports, nothing that proved anything, but enough gaps to plant seeds of doubt. Enough to build a narrative. And then the assignment sheet changed. Hannah was transferred from the surgical recovery unit to the PSYCU, the surgical intensive care unit, effective immediately. The change came through as a routine staffing decision, no memo attached, no explanation offered. She learned about it when the charge nurse, Patricia, pulled her aside at the 10 a.m. huddle and said quietly, "You're in PSYCU starting today. Dr. Sterling requested you specifically." Hannah didn't ask why. She didn't question the transfer. She simply nodded and gathered her supplies, moving to the intensive care wing with the same quiet efficiency that had kept her alive in Tikrit and kept her invisible at Sacred Heart. But this was different. The PSYCU was Sterling's domain. He rounded there twice daily, controlled the surgical decisions, managed the critical post-ops. The surgical recovery unit was shared among 6 attendings. The PSYCU was his. It was an isolation tactic, though Hannah wouldn't have called it that. It was strategic placement. It was cutting her off from Patricia, from the nurses who'd started to develop something like friendship, from the parts of the hospital where she wasn't constantly under his observation. The PSYCU had 12 beds. Sterling oversaw all of them. She would be watched. She would be alone. The smell of antiseptic was heavier in the PSYCU, bleach and alcohol mixing with the sharper scent of betadine. The machines beeped in different rhythms here, more frequently, more urgently. Every patient on this unit was someone's critical case, someone's complication, someone's last chance. Hannah had worked in environments like this before, but not since she'd left the military. Not since she'd become someone else. She was checking the 4-pump on bed 4 at 11:33 a.m. when she heard the commotion at the unit entrance. Elevator doors opening. Multiple voices. Orderlies moving quickly with the controlled urgency of an admissions. A stretcher came through with a tall man strapped to it, his chest wrapped in heavy bandaging, his face pale but alert. Navy hospital transport team, based on the uniforms. The patient was conscious and watching the ceiling pass overhead with the kind of calm that only came from combat experience. Captain James Marcus Webb, the chart read. Combat injuries. Post-op day from an emergency thoracotomy. Transferred from the Naval Medical Center in San Diego for specialized trauma recovery. His records were flagged for high-security visitation protocols, something about the nature of his injuries classified. The Navy didn't send classified patients to civilian hospitals without reason. Hannah watched him being transferred from the stretcher to bed 2 with the mechanical precision of medical protocol. 2 orderlies, 1 nurse, steady movements that minimized pain. The captain didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He simply watched the process happen to his body with the detachment of someone who'd spent time watching his own body do impossible things under impossible circumstances. She was on the opposite side of the unit, out of his line of sight, when she heard his voice at 2:14 p.m. "Hey! Nurse!" The one with the dark hair. His voice was rough but steady, the kind of voice that had been trained to carry authority despite pain. "Come here for a second." Hannah turned. The captain was awake fully now, his eyes tracking movement with the focus of someone who'd learned to notice details that killed you if you missed them. His chest was rising and falling steadily under the oxygen mask, his heart monitor beeping at a normal sinus rhythm. Stable. alert, watching her walk toward him like he'd been waiting for this specific moment. When she reached his bedside, he stared at her face for exactly 3 seconds. Then his eyes went wide. "You're the medic," he said. It wasn't a question. It was recognition, the kind that broke through pain medication and confusion and surgery recovery like a shock. "Tikrit. 2004, you pulled me out of that schoolhouse when I was just a scared kid with a rifle." The room didn't explode. The monitors didn't flatline. The world didn't stop spinning. But something shifted, subtle as a pressure change in a sealed room. Hannah's hand was still on the 4 pump. Her face was still arranged in the neutral expression she'd perfected. But her breathing had changed. She could feel it, the slight pause, the reset, the recalibration. Tikrit. 2004, a schoolhouse. A scared kid. Someone who shouldn't be alive, and yet here he was, recognizing her across 18 years of careful anonymity like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. "You need to rest, Captain," Hannah said. Her voice was exactly level. Professional. A nurse speaking to a recovering patient. But her hands weren't shaking. That was the hard part. Keeping her hands from shaking when the world just split open. "That was you," the captain said. His eyes were locked on her face with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle before he could forget the pieces. "Same eyes. Same tattoo on your wrist." He lifted his head slightly, wincing against the pain, looking for the faded mark on her left wrist that read Semper Fortis in letters so worn they were barely visible. "That was you. You carried me about 200 yards under fire and threw me in the back of a Humvee and told me to stop crying." Hannah looked at the monitor. Sinus rhythm, 78 beats per minute. Oxygen saturation, 96%. Stable. The captain's vitals were steady, but his recognition was unraveling something inside the careful architecture of her invisibility. She'd worked at Sacred Heart for 18 years without anyone asking questions about the gap in her employment history. Without anyone looking too closely at the woman who never attended social events, never mentioned a past, never deviated from the script of an ordinary nurse with an ordinary life. Now a Navy captain was saying her name. Not her civilian name. Her rank. "You should sleep," Hannah said quietly. "The morphine in your drip will help." But Captain Webb was already smiling, and his eyes were beginning to close, and somewhere in the back of Hannah's mind she could hear the sound of a clock ticking faster. Sterling would find out about this. He would have found out anyway. The investigator was probably in the naval records system as she stood here, but now there was a witness. There was someone who could confirm that Hannah Clarke was someone worth looking into. Someone worth destroying. The captain's breathing deepened as the medication took him under. His hand, which had reached out as if to grab her sleeve, fell away. His monitor continued its steady beep. And Hannah stood there, one hand still on his for pump, feeling 18 years of careful invisibility beginning to crack. Monday morning came like every morning, fluorescent hum, the beep of monitors, Hannah's hands moving through the familiar choreography of post-operative care. Captain Marcus Webb lay in the psycho bed, his chest tube draining serosanguineous fluid into a collection chamber, his breathing steady but shallow. She'd been assigned to him for the morning shift, which meant 18 years of careful invisibility had exactly 0 hours left before impact. But Hannah had survived worse than recognition. She'd survived Tikrit. She'd survived this. She was changing his dressing when she felt the shift. Not in the room. In him. Captain Webb's oxygen saturation had been 96% at 6:15 in the morning. Solid. Predictable. The kind of number that let you breathe. At 6:23, his monitor began a lazy descent. 94. 92. 90. Hannah's eyes lifted to the pulse oximeter. The number kept falling like a stone down a well. 88. 85. She moved to his bedside, her hand already reaching for his shoulder. "Marcus. Can you hear me?" His eyes opened. Confused. Searching. Scared in a way she'd seen before, that specific flavor of panic that came when your body stopped doing what it was supposed to do. "I can't breathe," he whispered. She pulled his gown back. And there it was. The trachea had shifted, not straight down his center, but visibly deviated to the right. His neck was swelling. The skin around the tube insertion site was pulling inward with each frantic breath, the intercostal muscles working like they were trying to power through concrete. Tension pneumothorax. His own lung was collapsing, and the pressure was pushing everything toward the right side of his chest like a boxer's gut punch. His oxygen kept dropping. 82. 79. The code team was for minutes away. Hannah didn't call for help. She moved. Her hands went to the crash cart, steady as a surgeon's laser, and came back with a 14-gauge angiocath needle. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask permission. She located the second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the anatomical landmark burned into muscle memory from 12 years of Navy medical training. She felt the ribs beneath her fingers, found the space between them, and pushed the needle in. For one terrible second, nothing. Then the hiss. The sound of air escaping under pressure, a sound like rage leaving a wound. The needle had found the pneumothorax cavity, and the trapped air rushed out with a velocity that made the needle vibrate in her hand. She left the catheter in and withdrew the needle, securing the plastic hub to his skin with trembling precision. Not from fear. From the strange restrained violence of saving a life in 2 seconds flat. The monitor beeped. 85. 90. 93. Captain Webb's eyes locked on hers. Recognition. Gratitude. The understanding of a man who'd just watched death pivot away from him. Nurse Clarke. His voice was barely a whisper. That was. The code team erupted through the doors, led by Dr. Sterling, whose face was already prepared for crisis. The room filled with voices and movement and the machinery of rescue. Hannah stepped back, keeping the catheter in place, giving the code surgeon space to assess. Sterling's eyes took in the scene, the 16-year-old male with improved oxygen saturation, the 14-gauge catheter secured to the chest wall, the subtle relaxation of the patient's facial muscles that came with pressure relief. His jaw tightened. She could see the moment he understood what had happened. Not what the procedure was. Who had done it? He didn't say thank you. He didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge her at all. Instead, he turned to the resident beside him. Get a stat chest X-ray. Confirm catheter placement. Then he was moving the code team around the bed, inserting himself between Hannah and Captain Webb like she was furniture that had been rearranged. Hannah stepped further back and waited for the room to settle into the controlled chaos of post-emergency management. No one was looking at her. No one was asking questions. The procedure had worked, the patient was breathing, the crisis was contained, and Dr. Sterling was already moving on to the next decision in a cascade of medical triage that would keep Captain Webb from dying on this Monday morning. She was collecting the empty needle packaging when she noticed Sterling's eyes on her. Not the grateful eyes of a surgeon witnessing competent care. The eyes of a man who'd just seen the one thing he didn't want to see, evidence of threat. He left the psycho at 6:37. His first phone call went to board member Richardson at 6:42. Hannah didn't hear the conversation, but she heard the tone when Sterling returned to the unit, that peculiar brightness that came with power being exercised. She was stripping Captain Webb's bloody sheets when Sterling appeared at the nursing station, cell phone to his ear, his voice carrying the low authority of someone calling in a marker. James. Sterling. I need a favor. A pause. No, not medical. I have a personnel issue. A nurse. She's demonstrated serious judgment lapses, and I need an expedited review. Another pause. Scope of practice violation. I have documentation. He was already building the narrative, Hannah realized. Already constructing the architecture of her termination with the precision of a man who'd done this before. His second call went to HR Director Grant. Same tone. Different leverage. Patricia. Sterling. I need to discuss the competency review of one of my nurses. The casual mention of her husband's post-operative complications, the one Sterling had overlooked in the surgical record when the man developed an infection, was barely disguised. It was there in the pause. In the exhale. In the way Patricia Grant's voice must have changed on the other end of that call, because Sterling's shoulders relaxed like a man who'd just moved a chess piece and felt the reverberations of checkmate 3 moves forward. His third call was to someone who answered on the first ring. A private investigator. The conversation was shorter. Just an address and a decade. Hannah Clarke. Employment history prior to 2006. Whatever you can find. Whatever you can find. Hannah understood what he was hunting for. The gap. The 18 years that didn't exist in any civilian database because they'd been spent in a uniform, on a base, in a war zone. A gap that would tell him exactly who she was and why her presence was a threat to more than his billing scheme. By 1:30 in the afternoon, Dr. Sterling called her into his office. She knew what was coming. She'd seen this trajectory before, not in hospitals, but in compounds and forward operating bases where command decisions came down with the weight of authority and the mercy of the guillotine. So she walked into his office, and she stood, and she waited while he sat behind his desk like a man who'd never once had to look up at anyone. "Sit down," he said. Hannah remained standing. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. The minor inconvenience of someone not following a direct order. He leaned back in his chair, and the leather creaked under his weight. "You performed a procedure this morning. A needle decompression. That's outside your scope of practice, Nurse Clarke. That's a physician intervention." He was reading from the file in front of him, the same one he'd been building since she'd flagged his billing codes. "You acted without authorization. Without physician oversight. You bypassed the chain of command." Hannah's voice came out measured. Quiet. It was a tension pneumothorax. The patient was desaturating. The code team was for minutes away. I don't care if the code team was 4 days away. Sterling stood now, his face flushing with the particular anger of a man who'd been contradicted. "You don't get to make that call. You followed protocol. You called for help. You waited. Instead, you decided you were a doctor." She didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Didn't explain that she'd been trained by the military medical corps for a decade. That she'd performed field procedures with her hands shaking and bullets striking metal 3 feet away. That she'd made triage decisions on a rooftop in Tikrit while her own blood dripped into her boots. She said, "He would have died. Not your call to make." Sterling opened a drawer and withdrew a suspension letter. The document was already filled out, her name, the date, the clinical justification for removing her from the unit. The speed of it suggested he'd drafted this yesterday. Or the day before. He'd been preparing all along. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full competency review. This suspension may result in termination." Hannah looked at the letter. At the words arranged in the precise language of institutional authority. Scope of practice. Failure to follow chain of command. Unsupervised invasive procedure. "Sign this," Sterling said, and slid it across the desk. Her hand reached for it. Then stopped. "Dr. Sterling." Her voice was different now. Lower. The surface calm of someone who'd made peace with consequences. "I documented your billing codes correctly. I didn't flag them to hurt you. I flagged them because they were wrong." For a moment, something naked crossed his face. Fear. The understanding that she knew. That she'd seen. That she'd left a trail of evidence in his own medical records. Then it closed down into anger. "Clean out your locker. Security will escort you. You can fight the suspension through the union, but I've already spoken to the board. They're not interested in a drawn-out process." He stood, opened the door. The dismissal was absolute. "We're done here." Hannah picked up the letter. Didn't sign it. She walked out of his office, past the nursing station where colleagues suddenly found urgent reasons to look at their monitors, past the break room where voices stopped as she passed, and down to the locker room where security guard Marcus, a man who'd helped her carry medical supplies last Tuesday, handed her a cardboard box. She packed her belongings in silence. A photograph of her son taken 3 months ago, Michael at the beach with the sun in his face and that specific smile that still belonged to the boy he used to be. A coffee mug someone had given her, marked with a blue heart. The white jacket with the hidden patch sewn deep in the lining, the faded embroidered insignia of her SEAL support unit, the one reminder of who she used to be, the one piece of her identity she'd never been able to discard no matter how hard she'd tried. The cardboard box was half full. That's what 18 years of invisible life looked like in physical form. Almost nothing. Almost no evidence that she'd ever existed in this place at all. She drove home in silence, and she sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Michael did his homework, where they ate dinner, where she tried to be a normal mother to a boy who deserved a normal life, and she stared at the cardboard box, and the tears came. Not the sharp tears of anger. Not the burning tears of injustice. The steady, relentless tears of something breaking that she'd spent 2 decades trying to keep whole. The tears of 18 years of invisibility collapsing in 4 hours. She didn't hear Michael come home. She didn't hear him drop his backpack. She didn't hear him walk into the kitchen until his voice, small and frightened, cut through the silence. "Mom." His voice was barely a whisper. A child's voice asking an adult question. "Why are you home early?" 3 days later, Hannah sits across from Administrator Carolyn Reeves in an office that smells of polished mahogany and regret. Reeves has the file open, the termination paperwork, her pen hovering like a guillotine about to fall. The fluorescent light hums overhead, casting Hannah's face in that institutional pallor that makes everyone look like they're already disappearing. She doesn't fidget. She doesn't plead. She simply sits with the kind of stillness that comes from having already survived things that should have killed her. The door explodes inward. Michael stands there, 17 years old, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, holding a shadow box against his chest like it might shatter. His voice cracks, "Mom, they need to see these, I found them in the garage." He opens it. The room doesn't just go quiet. The oxygen seems to leave. 2 bronze stars with velar gleam against red ribbon. A purple heart, deep eggplant and gold, catching the overhead light. 3 more purple hearts arranged in ascending order like a history of survival. And at the center, elevated on its own pedestal, a Navy Cross, the 4th highest military decoration in the United States, reserved for heroism so extreme that most people live entire lifetimes without ever seeing one in person, let alone holding one. Reeves' pen falls. The door to the hallway opens a second time. Captain Marcus Webb wheels himself into the office, his uniform pressed despite 6 weeks of hospital recovery, his eyes locked on Hannah with the intensity of someone recognizing a legend they thought was dead. His voice drops into the formal cadence of military protocol, Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke. Hannah doesn't answer. Not yet. She's watching her son's face transform the moment he realizes that his mother's silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. Reeves reaches for the file with shaking hands. Not the termination file. Another one, thicker, sealed with the Department of Defense seal. She opens it. Pages slide across her desk, commendation letters typed on official letterhead, performance evaluations written in military language that reads like poetry written by people who have seen things that demand precision in how they describe them. Her eyes widen with each page, moving faster, her breathing accelerating like she's climbing stairs in the dark. The hallway door opens again. The man who enters is built like a redwood. His dress uniform carries the shoulder boards of a Navy SEAL commander, gold warfare insignia above the left breast, real warfare, not the kind printed on t-shirts. His name is Commander James Rourke, and he commands the Naval Special Warfare Group 2 out of San Diego. He approaches Reeves' desk with the economy of motion of someone who has walked through fire and emerged knowing exactly where his next step needs to land. His voice is quiet, which makes it louder than any shout could ever be. Senior Chief Clarke extracted 7 wounded personnel under direct enemy fire in Tikrit, Iraq, on June 14, 2004. He places a photograph on the desk. Young Hannah, maybe 24 years old, blood saturating her tactical vest, her face a mask of absolute focus, dragging a wounded sailor with one hand while returning fire with the other, moving toward a Black Hawk with rotors already spinning. The image is the kind of photograph that changes how you understand the word courage. She was shot 3 times. Rourke's voice doesn't change inflection. Once in the shoulder. Once through the abdomen wall, missing vital organs by approximately 2 millimeters. Once in the thigh, severing the superficial femoral artery. She administered a tourniquet to herself while continuing to move the casualty. She didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She didn't cry out. He pauses. The silence is so absolute that the fluorescent lights seem to stop humming. She received a Bronze Star for that operation. Rourke places a second photograph down. Hannah, older now, in dress whites, shaking hands with a 3-star admiral. And a second Bronze Star for her medical innovations during her remaining tours. She was shot twice more in subsequent operations. Reeves' hands have gone white. She received a Purple Heart for each injury, for total. And on March 3, 2005, in Anbar province, she extracted 3 wounded Marines from a structure that was actively collapsing, sustaining a compression injury to her left leg and a penetrating chest wound in the process. The 3 Marines she extracted have 17 children between them. Those 17 children have a mother or father who came home. Rourke lowers a final photograph onto Reeves' desk. Hannah in hospital whites, her leg wrapped, her chest bandaged, her face carrying the kind of exhaustion that comes from having already given everything twice and discovering you have enough left to give a third time. The Navy Cross citation is typed beneath the photograph in military language that transforms gravity into literature for extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy fire. Despite sustaining critical wounds, Senior Chief Clarke prioritized rescue operations over personal medical attention, directly contributing to the survival of 3 service members whose loss would have devastated Allied operations in the region. The Navy Cross is the 4th highest military decoration in the United States, Rourke says quietly. Only the Medal of Honor ranks higher. She earned it at age 26. Michael is crying silently now, staring at his mother like she's someone he's never met and someone he's always known at exactly the same time. Reeves' voice comes out fractured. Senior Chief, I had no idea. Nobody told me. I should have been told. Hannah turns to her. When she speaks, her voice has dropped an octave from the deferential tone of 3 days ago. This is the voice of someone who has given orders that were obeyed by people trained to operate in darkness. I didn't tell you. But the FBI, Rourke continues, moving toward the window. 2 agents in dark suits are visible in the hallway, waiting. Has been investigating Dr. Sterling's billing fraud for 6 months. We were concerned the investigation was moving slowly. Then we received a copy of your hospital charting from Captain Webb. Your documentation is surgical in precision. Every discrepancy flagged. Every inflated charge cross-referenced. Every kickback amount calculated. You didn't just notice the fraud, Senior Chief Clarke. You proved it. The door opens. Special Agent Maria Cordova enters first, followed by her partner, both moving with the unhurried confidence of federal agents who have already won before the conversation began. Cordova carries a folder and a warrant that looks heavier than paper should weigh. Dr. Sterling is outside, having been called back to the hospital for what he believes is an emergency about Hannah's personnel file. He's brought his lawyer. He's wearing his physician's coat despite it being 5:19 p.m. on a Friday, a small arrogance that makes him visible from 30 feet away. Cordova finds him in the hallway. Her voice carries into the office clearly enough that everyone inside hears it. Dr. James Sterling, we have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of healthcare fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and accepting illegal kickbacks from Westbrook Medical Supply Corporation totaling approximately $470,000 over a 4-year period. Sterling's mouth opens. Closes. Opens again. "This is absurd," he says, his voice climbing toward panic. "I've done nothing, Administrator Reeves. Call legal. This is harassment. This is..." Reeves steps into the hallway. Her voice is cold enough to freeze blood. "Dr. Sterling, you're relieved of all duties effective immediately. Your medical license suspension is pending review by the Texas Medical Board." The security guard who handed Hannah her cardboard box of belongings 3 days ago approaches with an empty banker's box. He doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. He simply says, "I believe you know the way out, sir." Sterling's network disintegrates in real time. Board member Richardson releases a statement through his lawyer claiming he was unaware of any impropriety. HR Director Grant provides testimony about Sterling's coercion, including recorded conversations where he threatened her husband's surgical outcomes. The private investigator Sterling hired turns over all communications, emails explicitly showing Sterling's intent to fabricate evidence against Hannah, to destroy her, to bury her so deep that nobody would ever find the medals he'd had investigators searching for since Monday morning. As Sterling is led down the corridor in handcuffs, hospital staff watch in absolute silence. The same people who laughed when he humiliated Hannah in rounds. The same people who migrated away from her in the break room. The same people who stood by while he built a termination file out of lies. Hannah watches from Reeves' office window. Her son stands beside her, his hand finally steady enough to hold the shadow box without trembling. Commander Rourke's hand rests on her shoulder, a weight that carries recognition, the kind that only comes from people who have survived the unsurvivable together. Captain Webb, still in his wheelchair but moving with the muscle control of someone whose recovery is accelerating now that his rescuer's name has been cleared, raises his right hand in a salute so precise it sounds like a single word. Administrator Reeves approaches Hannah. Her voice carries something like, "Or, Senior Chief Clarke, I need to say this, and no apology will be adequate. I should have looked deeper. I should have questioned. I failed you." Hannah meets her eyes. "You didn't know." "No," Reeves says quietly. "But you trusted me anyway, and I let you down. I'd like the opportunity to do better." She pauses. "We're building a combat trauma program, a comprehensive training initiative for nurses working with military populations. Advanced wound management. Tactical combat casualty care protocols. Trauma decision-making under extreme pressure. We need someone to direct it. Someone who understands what these patients have survived. Someone who can teach from experience, not theory." Hannah looks at the shadow box. Michael is holding it like it might contain the last piece of his mother that is allowed to touch in 17 years. "I'd like that," Hannah says quietly. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, the Sacred Heart Combat Trauma Training Center opens with a ribbon cutting that doesn't make the news but changes the trajectory of trauma nursing in Southeast Texas forever. Hannah's office occupies the corner of the building with windows overlooking the training floor. Her desk is organized with the same meticulous precision that once triggered Dr. Sterling's paranoia and now serves as the gold standard for documentation in the department. On her office wall, 2 frames hang in parallel, one displaying the faded unit patch, finally visible after 2 decades of living in a jacket lining, professionally mounted and sealed under UV glass, preserved now not as a secret but as a statement. Beside it, a photograph of Michael in his Rice University ROTC uniform, his pride radiating outward like heat from an explosion. Through the observation window, Hannah watches her first cohort of nurses practice needle decompression on simulation mannequins, their hands moving with the precision she's teaching them, the same precision that saved Captain Webb's life. The tremor in her hands that used to wake her at 3 a.m. has diminished to something almost imperceptible. She sleeps through most nights now. Not all of them, some nights the Tikrit schoolhouse still appears in her dreams, but most. Captain Webb visits monthly, his recovery complete, his physical therapy finished, his body remembering how to move like a man whose life was saved by someone who understood that sometimes mercy is the most violent thing you can offer. He teaches a quarterly seminar called Recognizing Tactical Medicine Principles in Civilian Trauma, and every time he tells the story of the needle decompression, he pauses and says, "I was looking at the oxygen monitor climbing. 72. 81. 94. I watched the number climb because I was already dead in my mind, and those numbers meant I wasn't anymore. That's what Senior Chief Clarke does. She makes the dead walk again. One afternoon in late October, Hannah drives past Houston Community College. The window of room 147 is visible from the parking lot. Dr. Sterling stands at the front of a CPR certification class, teaching chest compression techniques to a group of community volunteers who look at their watches more often than at the instructor. His nameplate reads J. Sterling, CPR instructor with no medical credentials listed. He's earning $18 an hour, about 1/40th of what he used to make before federal investigators disassembled his fraud network like surgeons removing a tumor. Sterling looks up. His eyes meet Hannah's through the glass. She doesn't smile. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't perform victory. She simply nods once, a small acknowledgement of equilibrium restored, and continues driving. The look on Sterling's face, recognition mixed with the understanding that he will never be more than this, that he will never recover from the moment he decided that greed mattered more than integrity, carries more weight than any courtroom verdict could. That evening, Hannah speaks at a Veterans Integration seminar organized by Rice University. 200 people fill the auditorium, nurses, physicians, military personnel in transition, families trying to understand how their loved ones can be simultaneously broken and unbreakable. Hannah approaches the podium and doesn't use notes. She never uses notes when she's telling the truth. I spent 20 years hiding, she says, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the speaker system like something that's been compressed under pressure and finally released. I spent 20 years believing that the warrior in me was incompatible with the healer. That I had to choose between my past and my present. That showing up as my full self meant the world would punish me for what I'd survived. So I became invisible. And invisible people can do extraordinary things because nobody's watching. She pauses. The audience is absolutely still. I was wrong. They're not incompatible. The same discipline that made me an effective combatant makes me an effective clinician. The same clarity about mission and sacrifice that sustained me through for combat tours sustains me when I'm sitting with a family at 2 a.m. waiting for CT results. The warrior and the healer aren't different versions of the same person. They're the same person, complete. The applause starts in the back row and moves forward like a wave. Michael sits in the front, his ROTC uniform pressed, his face carrying the expression of a young man who finally understands that his mother's silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline, discipline so absolute that she could teach it to others. Commander Rourke, who made the drive from San Diego specifically for this moment, approaches the podium with a wooden plaque. The engraving reads, "In recognition of extraordinary service to the Naval Special Warfare community and the advancement of trauma medicine. Commander James Rourke, Naval Special Warfare Group 2. But before Hannah can take it, he adds something that wasn't on the plaque when it was designed. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. Hannah accepts the plaque with both hands steady, her tremor gone, her breathing calm, finally visible after 2 decades in the shadows. The fluorescent lights overhead hum their mechanical song, and for the first time in her life, Hannah Clarke doesn't flinch at the sound. If you made it this far, you saw something most people miss. The quiet ones, the ones who prefer to be invisible, are often the ones holding everything together. Hannah Clarke spent 20 years being underestimated, and it nearly cost her everything. Subscribe for more stories about the warriors living next to us, invisible until the moment they become necessary. Like this video if you believe the people we underestimate deserve to have their stories told. And comment, have you ever discovered someone in your life was far more than you realized?